Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Please try to take your seats if it's possible, and if not, you can be in the front of the room. Buenas tardes, compañeros y...
Good afternoon. Dear colleagues, we're going to begin our meeting today. Exceptionally, we have the presence of our dear colleague, Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sánchez. You know that You know that in the group we took this initiative to make this type of meeting possible. Meetings between the governments where our political family has responsibility, so that we can try to find this space for encounter and exchange and debate, and see how we can strengthen the cooperation within the Social Democrat family at a very important moment. We all know that these are exceptional times. We are almost in the final stretch of finalizing the European response to COVID with great difficulties and with great achievements, many of them thanks to our family, our political family, and thanks to the work of all of you here in the Parliament, and thanks to the work also of our comrades in the Council and the different governments. Great achievements with the Social Democrat seal, and now we're seeing the improvements after the very difficult times that Europe has experienced. Now we're seeing, of course, the difficulty in the war in Ukraine, which obliges us to undertake this work, keeping very clear the principles of social democracy and the European Union, to defend the values of the Union, the rule of law, to defend Ukraine against the criminal attack by Putin, and doing all of this while being aware that we need to maintain our values more than ever. Solidarity with those who are suffering, support to Ukraine, but also addressing the social and economic consequences that this war will have within the European Union itself, and of course outside of it. These are the priorities we have now. Today, the Extraordinary Council, which has lasted 2 days, yesterday and today, has finalized very important decisions in terms of economic sanctions and support to Ukraine. And I think this is the perfect time to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Spain. I'd like to tell you that it's an important day. 4 years ago, in Spain, a motion of censure was being debated against a corrupt government, which led to the beginning of a moment of hope for our country. And that began 4 years ago today. That beginning of a socialist government led by our Prime Minister. So Pedro, thank you for your work over these 4 years, and thank you also for making us proud of European social democracy. Thank you for blazing a coherent trail and supporting the fundamental values that unite our family. Go ahead, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
And thanks to the members of the group for inviting me to discuss with you all together the role that we socialists and social democrats have to play in Europe. In the face of a world that is running at an unthinkable speed, we need to grant ourselves the opportunity to take our time and reflect together. It is a very appropriate moment because Europe is at a turning point. There was already a sense of it when the conference on the future of Europe was conceived. Now, with the war in Ukraine, we are witnessing a tectonic shift that will change the course of history. And facing this moment, the European Union will have to decide the way forward it wants to take. We as pro-European and even more as social democrats should not be defensive here. we have an attractive project for the European Union, opposite to the free ride of the conservative and the Eurosceptic model or the illiberal alliance of European nations proposed by the far right. 3 years ago, I had the chance to address the European Parliament. Back then, I called for the need to protect Europe as the Europe could protect its citizens. I know our group is fully aware of the risk that the European Union is facing. Now more than ever, we need to take Europe seriously to protect and to promote it. And now I turn to Spanish because it's an important language, and I feel much comfortable with Spanish. Amigos,
Dear friends, over the past 15 years, we have experienced many crises in Europe. 2008, with the financial crisis, which caused a recession whose consequences were very painful around the world, and particularly in the countries of Southern Europe. The incorrect response, based on cuts, an absolutely neoliberal ideological response, had a very harmful consequence socioeconomically and politically for all of our citizens. Politicians, with those responses not based on solidarity, created many consequences, including discrediting the European project, returning to false nationalism, which can no longer exist because now we are all interconnected, and the pandemic has demonstrated this much more clearly than any other crisis. And of course, the loss of the European feeling, whose greatest expression there was Brexit, of course, which has consequences. As we know, it's something that the Parliament and the Council spent many long days of debate on these issues. After a long and painful road, we were finally emerging from that crisis when the pandemic struck. And this time, and this is what I would like to highlight and recognize in the European Parliament, and above all in the Socialist group, I think Europe learned the lesson and showed the best version of itself. Because unity, solidarity, have been the recipes followed have been the solutions found by the European institution to respond to this crisis. Probably before the crisis of the pandemic. Certainly it wasn't immediately after the financial crisis, although the socialists had been asking for this for a very long time, even well before the financial crisis. We mutualized debt to achieve those next generation funds, which will allow us to help our economies recover and modernize. Of course, we can't forget the situation with vaccines. I recall that over the years of the pandemic, the Council had many discussions among leaders, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, where the EU was being criticized for not showing solidarity with third countries in terms of donating vaccines. And now, on the other hand, the European Union is the main actor, the main agent in vaccine donation in the world. We donate more vaccines than we administer to our fellow citizens. And I think this very clearly is the result of a completely different policy that we experienced during the pandemic, very different from during the financial crisis. Now, as we're leaving behind the economic effects of the pandemic, which was so serious and so difficult that we've experienced, and of course we continue to experience, now we find ourselves facing Putin's war, the invasion of Ukraine, certainly, as the previous speaker said, is unjustifiable. It's on Europe's doorstep. It's something that perhaps nobody could even imagine up until the day that the invasion happened. And also, there are two ways forward in front of us. There's division and insolidarity that we've suffered during the financial crisis, or unity and solidarity, which we expanded and defended in response to the COVID crisis. I think Europe has been very clear, and I'd like to highlight the role of Mr. Scholz in attempting to resolve the situation in Ukraine. This is a response that showed solidarity with Ukraine, both within and outside of the borders, but also with the consequences of the war on the lives of our citizens and the economy as a whole. That's why I would like to begin by highlighting what we call European patriotism. This is a patriotism which is noble. It's not based in the exaltation of risks or of identities. Rather, Certainly, it is not based on the idea of the superiority of Europe above another country. Rather, it's a patriotism which is based on principles and values, which Putin is trying to cast doubt on by invading Ukraine. These are the values that hold the Union together: freedom, solidarity, equality, political pluralism, and democracy. These values are shared not only in Europe, they're also something that social democracy has defended since its very beginnings. They have made it possible to have this model based on social democracy, based on the rule of law, which certainly can be improved, but which is greatly admired by third countries in terms of the response to the pandemic and also in terms of the response to Putin's war. Certainly, when Europe sowed neoliberalism, it harvested this unity, and when it sowed social democracy and unity, it harvested more European feeling amongst European citizens. And that is what I call European patriotism. The patriotism of the citizens who received their vaccines with record speed and in an order that did not depend on money, but rather that was one that was based on the level of vulnerability. In other words, defending the idea of the welfare state. The citizens who have benefited from the various unemployment support schemes defended by social democracy, both in the parliament and in the council. I'd like to recognize the work of Sidige, the president of the party, and the entire organization, because in the parliament and in governments and in the council and in the party, we have all been leading the debates which now, fortunately, are leading to such important policies for our fellow citizens. Facing Putin's war, supporting Ukraine, welcoming Ukrainian refugees in all of our countries. Certainly the citizens are seeing how European funds are transforming their enterprises and improving their lives. Colleagues, I believe that we need to sow social democracy. We need to sow the pro-European feeling, and then we will harvest a much more fair Europe in social terms. And that's what we're doing in our response to the pandemic, and that's also what we're doing in our response to the war. I think the war shows us a number of things. The future is not guaranteed. Peace is not guaranteed. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to visit President Zelensky in Kiev. I saw the horrors that had been committed. And let's not forget that this is a war perpetrated by a permanent member of the UN Security Council, that is by Russia, and it is questioning the foundation of the international order. And one of the main articles of that international body, that is to say, sovereignty, national sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries, the right for a country to decide on its own future, in this case, Ukraine. And the world certainly has become a much more volatile world after this invasion. And I think, therefore, it's important, as the socialist governments are doing in the council, and as I know that you also do in the parliament, it's fundamental to defend multilateralism at this time, because multilateralism is being attacked by external forces. I've always been struck by how Putin doesn't recognize any supranational institution. Have you seen how he doesn't meet with any leader of a supranational institution? He always refers to the President of the United States, or the German Chancellor, or the President of France, but he doesn't meet with the Presidency of the Commission, or the Presidency of the Council, certainly not of the European Parliament. Just a few days ago, after many weeks of the invasion, he met with the Secretary General of the UN in the Kremlin. All of the things that extreme forces are questioning, that is to say, the undermining of multilateralism, that is what we need to strengthen. Multilateralism is our European project. I also believe that the economic consequences of the invasion of Ukraine involve extreme sacrifice for our citizens. We're seeing that in the increase in the cost of living, the price of energy, the price of oil, and the price also of food products. I think it's important that altogether, the Parliament, the Council, and also governments at the national level, it's important that we explain to our citizens that this is a cost which we must undertake. It will be difficult. It will be hard. Unfortunately, It's coming on the heels of a pandemic that we are experiencing. We're almost out of it. We hope to be out of it in the coming months. But that's a cost that we must undertake, because what is being undermined by Putin is the foundation of the society we live in. If we look elsewhere, if we look away, we won't be helping Ukraine, and we won't be helping the future generations of our continent in terms of their way of life and the democracy that they would be able to benefit from in the future. I think that during the pandemic, reactionist extremists flirted with anti-vaccination and other movements in Spain. We even saw that there were those saying that this virus was a Chinese virus. They didn't say it so clearly, but they would let it drop that vaccine shouldn't be administered, etc. And it's clear that the pandemic and now the war will be used by the forces who do not believe in Europe, who want to see Europe shrinking. They don't want to see Europe being strong. Now they're trying to strengthen their links with Putin, who up until a few months ago they considered an example to be followed. They no longer allow themselves to ask that more clearly, more obviously, as we have seen in the French elections now. But they have an agenda which is still profoundly anti-European. Europe has many different enemies, but there's only one danger to the European project. There's only one threat to Europe, and that is the far right, which opens the doors for also the right, which opens the doors to the far right and entering governments. It's not just about the presence of the far right in European parliaments in any of our countries. They're represented in this parliament. But more dangerous than that are those who open the doors to the governments and to the policies of that far right. And this is something that we need to be very aware of. Because certainly, dear friends, there is a clear dividing line between those who want to strengthen the Union and those who want to weaken it. We're defending European solutions to the big problems, the big European questions, such as the crisis that we talk about less now, but which is still very present, namely climate change, the increase in energy prices, addressing the actions of multinationals. That's something that the Social Democrats have been addressing for a great deal of time. There are those who want to expand rights and those who want to restrict them, those who want to welcome people to Europe and those who want to alienate the citizens. So those who are in favor of science are those who spread misinformation. And I think that the work of the Progressive Caucus and the Conference on the Future of Europe represents our political family, a family that offers concrete proposals that are ambitious and realistic, with a positive move for strengthening our values. And it has been shown that that dividing line that I mentioned, there are many who are on the side of Europe, on the European side of the dividing line, and we need to recognize that, but we need to go further. If you'll allow me, I'd like to reflect on the Europe that we want. First of all, I think that the socialists want a Europe that is master of its destiny. So it's time to leave behind certain norms that maybe made sense in a Europe that had fewer members, but that doesn't make sense now, and it undermines the efficiency of our work. For example, the rule of unanimity, which certainly maximizes the sovereignty of the members. I think that we're stronger when we talk with a single voice, absolutely, when we speak as Europeans. That was shown with the invasion of Ukraine. Our way of being in the world and existing in the world is through Europe. That's something we need to strengthen, reviewing our procedures for decision-making. Secondly, I think we need to strengthen the idea that Europe is a space of freedom and rights. Certainly an authentic community of values, and I particularly like to thank the effort of our colleagues in Poland and Hungary in their daily defense of the principles and values of Europe. We also want Europe to be a fair Europe, which combats the main evil of our societies, that is to say, inequality, lack of opportunities. This was expressed by the government of Spain in a non-paper that we contributed to at the social summit, also from at the social summit that was held in Oporto, referring to strengthening the European Pillar of Social Rights, the development of the action plan. In Spain, we are going to have the Spanish presidency of the EU in the second semester of 2023. And those are some of the main commitments that we're going to express at that time, our commitment to this social pillar of the European Union. We talk about wage equality, minimum wages, strengthening and protecting collective bargaining, regulating internet platforms to put an end to unstable employment, ensuring care and the youth guarantee. It's not just about creating more employment, which certainly is important. It's also about making sure that that employment is of greater quality. In the working group of the Conference on the Future of Europe, led by our dear colleague Irache, what was asked, what was requested? Strengthening the competitiveness of the union, deepening the market, and having solid policies for that. And I very much recognize that proposal of aligning the European semester with social indicators. I think it's something that we need to continue to defend. There's an element also, if you'll permit me, that I'd like to highlight as a characteristic of social democracy, and that is gender equality. Socialists, social democrats, those in favor of labor are those who are in favor also of feminism, continuing to move forward in salary equality, political representation in business of women, and of course, combating everything to do with gender violence. When we talk about these regressive winds that are blowing, these reactionary winds that are blowing, including in advanced democracies like the United States, where even the right to decide to be a mother or not is being put in question, now is when we need to defend our feminist roots. Logically, of course, we also want Europe to be proud of its diversity. We're a few weeks from the Pride celebration in all of the European capitals. I'd like to remind you that along with other prime ministers, we were the first socialist ministers to, in the European Council, propose a strong declaration against certain activities that were being carried out by prime ministers in the Council related to a sort of link being made between what is represented by homosexuality and various diseases or behaviors which have nothing to do with homosexuality. And finally, I'd like to raise a reflection on security in Europe. Irache, dear colleagues, this, of course, has been a subject of debate in the European Council over these 2 days in Brussels. We've been able to use the European Mechanism for Peace for the first time in our history, approved in 2020, in order to send military material to Ukraine. We need to do that in order to provide to further develop the technological base and an industrial base in Europe. It's true that we currently have a fragmented defense industry. It's something that needs to be made more solid, absolutely. And we also talk about further advances in terms of the Atlantic Alliance. You know that in Madrid we're going to have a very important summit in June, in which we certainly hope, and in the government of Spain, we're doing everything possible to ensure that consolidated democracies, that the two new democratic governments will be able to join the alliance. And what we also need to do is strengthen the idea of open strategic autonomy, not only in the area of defense, but also in the area of health, of public health. We need to reflect on the lacks, the deficits, the difficulties we had at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of provision of health material, and also related to semiconductors and microchips, and of course, the idea of food and energy autonomy. The fundamental idea I'd like to share with all of you is that strategic autonomy cannot be a return to protectionism. It's very important that we be aware that in this geopolitical context, Europe also has a great responsibility and a great opportunity to create links with regions that want to have a much stronger tie to Europe, but which unfortunately, due to the political situation, to the debate we've had in the Council and the Parliament, we have delayed that link. For example, Africa, but I'm also thinking of the Latino American community. I think there are many countries that want to strengthen those ties with the European Union, and which could also give us an important geostrategic and geopolitical weight in the context in which we live. Certainly for a country like Spain, and I think for all of you as well, having a proper migratory policy is fundamental. Moving forward in that pact on asylum and migration is primordial. In Spain, we have made extraordinary efforts to face the avalanche of requests for asylum that we are getting from all over the world, not just from Africa, but also from Latin America. That is primordial for us. That is key, that we have that pact on asylum and migration at the European scale. And I'd like to briefly refer to something I said earlier. We have our commitment to feminism. Now, our commitment to the energy transition and the ecological transition. I think this is a moment in which we're going to see many tensions in our societies, also in the political debate, not only from the far right, but also from the right, when it comes to the need to slow down our objectives and our commitments in this area, using the geopolitical context to reduce or even move backwards in terms of the commitments Europe has in terms of the climate crisis. That's not the case in Spain. That's not the case of the socialist government. I'm sure it's not the case for the majority of progressive governments in Europe, and certainly not for this parliamentary group. But we must double our efforts precisely in order to defend the ecological roots of social democracy. I always say there's no green that's stronger than the red of social democracy. There's nothing stronger than the red of social democracy when we talk about the environment and we talk about feminism. We will continue along that path because we connect with many young people who want to look at social democracy and believes in social democracy as a transformational power in order to address all the difficulties related to the climate crisis. I'd like to conclude by sharing a reflection with you. The French presidency of the Council in the second half of 2023 will be very important. It's important for me, of course, because I'm the Prime Minister of that government, but also because it will overlap with the last months of the mandate in this Parliament. In this Parliament, the Commission and the Council. So many files will be arriving in that second semester of 2023. What I can guarantee is that we will have a progressive view with all of those files. We will try to take into account and recognize the importance of all the community institutions in the approval of all of those files. And particularly, I'd like to refer, since I'm here, I'd like to refer, of course, to the European Parliament, which has always been at the vanguard of many debates, which then become a reality also within the Council. And so to conclude, I'd like to recognize the contribution of this group to strengthening Europe, to the progressive response to the different crises that we have ahead of us, and simply to say to you that despite the war, despite the pandemic, social democracy has demonstrated its virtues, its strengths, its in the political responses that we have found for the pandemic, and which we are certainly finding now for the war. And I cannot but feel proud of this group, and I recognize it not only because I have some members of my party here, starting off with Irache, the president of the group, but because I recognize myself in each and every one of the MEPs, regardless of what country you come from, because you are representing all of us. You are representing what we want to strengthen, which is Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear President. I have to tell you that we are very proud to have leaders like you to represent our principal values as Social Democrats. we can feel that we are working together with the common position in this difficult moment, but we know that more than ever we are important in this project, and I want to thank. I will ask now the people who are not from our group if there are some journalists in the room to withdraw, because we will continue now with our debate. As you can